Brought to you by Telehelping, a virtual assistant staffing company for professionals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Hall. I'm the host of The Faces, Entrepreneurs Are People Too, and the founding CEO of Telehelping, a virtual staffing organization, and the hero and sponsor of my podcast. So thank you so much for Telehelping, allowing me the opportunity to talk to great people like Greg. Greg, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a pleasure.
No, I'm excited, Greg. And I apologize. I'm calling you Greg. You are Gregory. Would you prefer Gregory?
Greg is fine. And you also did a very good job of avoiding the other thing, which no one knows how to pronounce that last name. It's pronounced Toppe. And if you had said it and pronounced it correctly, you would have been only about the third time in like 300,000 telemarketer calls and like what and job interviews.
Gregory, that's Toppe. It's Toppe. It's hilarious because I was going to pronounce it as they do in Spanish, which would be tope. Which is a speed bump, by the way. So in Spanish.
Oh God! Really, you're comparing me to a speed bump? Okay.
Well,
okay.
It also can be a pothole too. So pick your poison.
Wow. Digs in fast. Literally digging that hole.
There we go. And that's the podcast. We're done.
All right. Excellent.
Well, Gregory, I'm very excited to chat with you today. And I asked the name side of things because I am in the process of getting ready to have our second son, and I am adamant about not naming my child anything that people can shorten without their request. Right, we got to stay away from Williams and everything, because what if he doesn't want to be Will? And so that's why I ask.
Well, I got to tell you, when we went through the name thing, I avoided any type of thinking like that, thinking people are going to decide what their name is regardless of whether they like it or not. So you might as well just go with the natural name. And in fact, William was actually on my list of names for my second son, but my wife did not want him to be called Willie. And honestly, I feel like his personality is kind of a Willie. Sorry, Matthew. I know you'd be ticked off at me for saying that, but it's true.
Oh, well, Greg, I have so many ways I want to run with this, but before we get too far down the road, let's tell the listeners who we're chatting with here today. Who's Gregory?
So I am a money manager and registered investment advisor based in Thousand Oaks, California. I started up about a year ago, but I'm still really in the early phases. I didn't start with a big client list to come over. So I started at ground zero, and I'm still a little closer to zero than where I want to be, but I think that's changing fast. It's a really exciting time as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and on a personal level. So I got to do a quick digression. I was at the Reagan Library a couple of years ago with a buddy of mine, and it's a great place to go regardless of your politics. It's fascinating. But we were going through the exhibits, and my friend made the remark that all of his past experiences just kind of came together to make him who he was as president. And, when I was talking to a couple of friends about, creating a backstory for things like this and what have you, it's like, yeah, I kind of feel like all these weird little things that I've done have all led me to where I am now. And honestly, I feel like I'm at the best part of my life. It's awesome. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. I grew up in northern Wisconsin, about a half hour west of Green Bay. Yes, Packer fan, shareholder, the whole thing. Little town of 7,000 people in the middle of nowhere. And I got to tell you, back then, it was only 2-lane roads. So you were kind of isolated, particularly in the winter. It was really in the middle of farming territory. My dad was a teacher and a basketball coach, and interesting guy, very passionate about, particularly on the sidelines. Refs hated him. My mom was kind of a rabble-rouser. She came from out east, and she developed a number of education programs, special ed, and ultimately went on to get her PhD and teach at the university level, Wisconsin and a few other places. But the interesting thing about it is, I don't know why we lived where we did, because my mom never totally fit in there. She liked it. I never fit in. My dad never left northern Wisconsin, so he was right at home. But it was interesting because I got a lot of independent thinking from them. and a lot of passion for what I do, a lot of intellectual curiosity from my mom, and a desire to really do things for more than just my immediate self. And that's been a lifelong journey in trying to fulfill those things. You think they should all go together. I mean, oh, that sounds like really noble characteristics. Uh-uh. Let me tell you something. Passionate and independent minded means difficult and a pain in the ass. Pardon my language.
It sums me up.
Yeah, so I'm sure you can identify with that. Speak your mind and you end up alienating someone. So my whole life has been kind of this weird little progression of fulfilling parts of these, but I never really professionally found like I had a home. And that's ultimately what led me to become an entrepreneur. But along the way, I had marketing and client service type roles and sales roles. I had investment analyst roles, portfolio management. I was at small firms that were no growth, small firms that were on the way to becoming really big growing firms. And so I've seen a lot of variety of things, and all these experiences now I can bring to the forefront and build something in my own way and really create it in a way that matches my values. And the final twist I'll throw in there is one of the reasons why I left my peak career position about 10 years ago is I had twins. I had one and then two. So I know exactly where you're at. And man, does that change your perspective on everything? Oh my goodness. So yeah, I had to make a change. It was just, I was doing the LA commute from hell, high stress job, traveling. I got 3 kids. I want to be a part of their life. So I left the rat race, or so I thought anyway. And then did a bunch of startup stuff, consulting, did some corporate M&A, and thought, man, I really need to go back to my bread and butter. And that's where I got today. So I'm excited that I've done it. And here I am now. And this is the first interview I've ever done. So I feel like, you know what? The stars are aligned.
It's great too. And so I think my wife said it well. She said, the best and worst thing that's ever happened to you is you made enough money never to work for anyone ever again. Right. And that is, it's two-sided, right? The sword. It's one side is like, wow, talk about just independence, the freedom that you feel in life to know that you will not have to rely on a person. And now the other side of that was I became, what little filter I had was disengaged. And so I'm right there with you. And I've tried to reel it in very much. Like, I'm like, okay, well, it's one thing about being honest. And I try to take my own medicine. I tell my brother, just because it's true doesn't mean you need to say it, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm trying to take that pill myself. But it's great that you went from Wisconsin all over to Thousand Oaks. I've actually only been to Thousand Oaks probably once or twice. I worked for a law firm out there once called Amgen, they sell pharmaceuticals too. They just have a bigger legal department. So
I live a bike ride away from Amgen.
Oh yeah, no,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I worked. It was very brief because they acquired a pharmaceutical company that I worked for. So I was there long enough just to get my payout, which was
Nice.
Great because I had just started that pharmaceutical company.
Nice.
And so I was like, oh, here are your shares. You hold on to them. And they're like, hey, here's your money for your shares. You're like, wow, I wish this, what do I do? They're like, you go get another job now. I'm like, oh, so that's what you do in this case. Like, got it.
That's
and
awesome.
So, no, that's great. And, we're having our second son. And, we have one son who is just, a ball of energy, like my copy. And he's great. And we're getting ready to have a new one. I haven't said, but his name could be Winston. And so
Okay.
I landed on Winston, talking about, namesakes and everything, just because I was like, we went through so many different two sides. I live in Mexico half the time.
Yeah.
And so I have to think about, well, how does the name sound in Spanish? Right. And then so Winston, it doesn't really go that well. Right. And so we're giving him like Santiago as a Latin name in the middle, because he'll probably go by Santiago most of the time. But like we were saying before, avoiding things like Will and Joseph. I don't want Joe or Joey or any of those crazy things. So, incredible journey. But, I think that you hit on one thing that I like to dial in for folks that, our audience is made up a lot of young entrepreneurs, people who I say are falling into the hustle culture of things, right? And that's the fact that you identified that you had this, peak of your career. A great way of putting it, right? We always think I had that peak of my career when I decided to sell out of my healthcare company, but I also worked 20-hour days, it seemed like. And, you're like, oh, it's the top of my life. I'm working for a company that's worth so much money. How great am I, right? But you also had kids and you're trying to, be in their lives. And you had to make a choice. Like, what does it mean to be successful? Like, what does that word mean? And it sounds like you've learned that it isn't all about the name on the desk and the door and how much money is coming through on the paycheck. But most people confuse it for that.
Well, particularly pre-kids and earlier, you grow up being rewarded for achievement. You get the grades, you go to the university, you get the job, and then you get promoted. And there's so much ego that develops, and you need an ego to succeed. You really do.
Correct.
Maybe not too much, but you do need an ego, and you progress, and your identity gets attached to it. And I'll be the first to tell you, the first 6 to 12 months after I left, I had a minor identity crisis. It's like, who am I? And in fact, I had the identity crisis going into it. I mean, let's call it what it was. I had a bit of a midlife crisis. Did not get the Corvette or the ponytail or anything, and I'm still married, which is good. She put up with me. But it really is an identity situation, and you really need to decide what kind of person do you want to be, both for yourself, because you owe something to yourself, but then for your family. Your spouse has certain ambitions, your kids have needs, and then later ambitions. And what does that mean? I had my path. I don't think there's a right answer. There's definitely wrong answers. And I don't know that my path was the best, but it seemed to work. And it seemed to address some needs that we had at the time. And now we're just playing it through. So.
Well, and that's important to point out, is everyone's path is different. Everyone's running down this, getting a life coach and a mentality of the world, and this person on Instagram guiding them. And the truth is life is a series of just choices that ends up seeming like a straight line. But it's just everything from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, and every choice in between that leads you to where you're going. And, once I exited my healthcare company, I had thought that maybe doing nothing is what I wanted to do. because how many people get to actually try out doing nothing, right? It's a very small group of privileged people. They get the opportunity to just exist. And it was cool. However, when I forgot what month it was, I started asking, and I was like, wow, I don't really think this is for me. Like, I needed more structure. I realized that I was running from the entrepreneur inside of me. And so you need something, right? You just got to discover what it is. Some people just need painting. Some people want a studio in their house and they just want to paint. And that's what they want to do with all their time. Some people want to build companies. Some people want to help other people, like you said.
Yeah, it comes down to who are you and what really matters to you. I mean, you can get through your 20s and 30s and maybe 40s without ever having to deal with that. Kids and weddings are the obvious situations where that comes up, but there gets to be a point where you might want to figure that out, because if you don't, it's really going to kill you when you retire. Literally, it will kill you when you retire, but it may kill you before then even. And that's where I got, once I had the kids, is what matters to me. And for me, being a part of my kids' lives really mattered. I'll tell you, my parents divorced. My dad lived about an hour and a half away. My mom remarried. And as a child of divorcees go, I had a pretty good existence. It wasn't by far from perfect, but certainly much better than horror stories. But you look at it and go, I don't want to replicate this part. I want to be there for my kid on this event or on this occasion. I don't want to be there for just special memories. I want to be there for messy day-to-day stuff. And that just suddenly mattered to me a whole heck of a lot more than I ever would have expected. And so then it really became a thing of, how do I build a life around that? And that's a big part of my values. My values are family first, and then kind of those characteristics I described early on, that, that's who I am, the passion, the intellectual curiosity, need to help others. And I'm trying to blank on the other one now, but you got to be who you are just the same. You can't walk away from yourself for other people or for a job either. You get that dissonance that just undermines you at some point.
Well, yeah. And you said, like, what is our purpose, right? And I spoke to a gentleman who he was on a podcast probably about a month ago, and he advises startup entrepreneurs at Rice University in Stanford. Great guy, and he always asks people, like, well, what's your purpose? And they're like, well, we're going to use AI, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we'll reinvent the industry. Like, yeah, but what's your purpose? Yeah. Like, well, we're going to raise, $1 million. Great. Like, what's your purpose? Right. And they're like, well, I'm confused. He's like, you're telling me our only responsibility here, the only thing we're trying to achieve is money? Like, that's what we're trying to do? He's like, that's a path for failure, a life failure, not company. Your company may be wildly successful, right? He's like, but where does that leave you? Right. Where ways are you think you're going to get fulfilled? And, I've had the nice cars, I've had the nice things, and I have them, right, currently, and it's great. However, but how hollow are they? Like, to me, I realized when I was younger and successful that I was like, and this is before kids, right? And I was like, is this it? Is this all? Like, you're sitting there, 28 years old, and you feel like you've made it, and you're like, is this really? What am I going to do for the next 50 years of my life? Right? Yeah. If this is what I was meant to achieve, I achieved it. Great. And then having kids changed everything to me. I read an article recently, and it says, if you want to change your personality, have kids.
Ain't that the truth? Although I do think it changes it, but it also reveals a whole lot. Everything that you are becomes amplified. If you're a slob before kids, your house will be a disaster after kids. It's going to be a disaster even if you're a perfectionist, but everything gets amplified, Short-tempered, oh boy, you got problems there, bud.
Yeah. And that's so funny you say that, because I've come accustomed to having someone clean up the house all the time. Having a live-in,
must have
like a live-in, and so, but we're back in the States right now, and it's temporary because we're only back here long enough to have the new baby. So I was able to spend some time at our place in Napa, and we're back in Nevada, and it's great. However, my wife will not let me hire someone to clean the house. She insists on doing it herself. However, and this is I've had this like epiphany, like a couple nights over the course of a couple of weeks, where I'm sitting there at the end of the night cleaning up everything, right? I wake up at 5 o'clock. I love what I do, and I work all day, and then I go play tennis, right? And then or exercise, and I come back home, and the first thing I do is I walk through the door and start picking up things. I mean, not even a full step through the door, and I walk into what looks like the remains of a battlefield.
Oh, right? God, yeah.
And then I walk through the living room, and my 8-month pregnant wife is sitting there just like glued to the couch. And I was like, so I'm going to go ahead and say you're losing at the bat. This isn't going the way you planned.
Yeah. We've all been there. Our version was after the kids, and we were having the same discussion. And finally, I went out, and we need to get someone in here because this is way more than we want to be doing.
For me, I think the toughest part for having someone always being present to do that for us, and that's very important for those who, for context, right? My wife is not pregnant. She runs a successful restaurant group for us. We have multiple restaurants, and restaurants are the most work you'll never get paid for, right? Yeah. And so that's the mark of a successful man. Right? You make enough money to lose it in restaurants, and so
or wineries.
Or wineries. There you go. That's how you make a small fortune. By starting off with a large fortune. Yeah. And so she runs that. But when she's doing that, and even when she's pregnant, like, there's no one to do anything, right? And it's like, all right, well, who's going to do the dishes? Like, who is going to cook? Yeah. Because if she's going 90 miles per hour one direction, and I'm running the other direction, right? When we come back together, we're like, well, I guess we're gonna spend our hangout time together unscrewing this mess.
Yeah.
And so it is for busy family members and for folks who I'm a clean person too. I don't know about you. Like my wife I should have picked this up on her car when I first started dating her. Like that locker room Pandora's box of a vehicle she had, where I should have seen the red flags. And then I'm the type of person that like lines up my shoes at the front door.
Oh. See, you're a perfect compliment, though. I mean, it's like you got to have the ship and you got to have the anchor. If you're missing one or the other, you got problems, So it's perfect.
It is, I can only imagine if both of us were one or the other way. Yeah, it'd be tough.
Yeah. I want to go back to that why thing that we were talking about, though. When he was talking about you were talking about the guy who does the startup things. When you ask that, people don't think about it, but that's ultimately going to depend on what your success looks like. If you're just trying to flip something, how you do a flip is very different than if you're trying to become the next Facebook. You engineer your financials differently, you hire differently. And so people just launch into some things and thinking, oh, they'll figure it out, or it's not important, it's too existential and I'm a doer or whatever. But at some point, you got to have that stuff semi figured out, because you're just as likely to blow it up by not taking care of business the way you should have later on down the road if you don't have at least a nascent idea of some of those things.
No, it's very important because, and I have a hilarious stories that I'm sure you do too, and I want to hear yours. But I used to think that success was $100 million. Like I used to have this idea that if I could just make $100 million, like then I would have made it. And then I made a handful, and I was like, well, I think $100 million is far more money than I thought it was. And so I'm like, it's a lot of money. I'm like, do I really need that much money? I don't think I need that much money. And then I asked myself, like, well, what does success look like? And now for me, I'm, money-wise, I'm a very minimal person, right?
Yeah.
I trade every morning at 6:30 Pacific Standard Time. Me and my buddy operate a small equities firm together, just trading. And he trades all day, right? Because since we sold the company, he's done nothing except trade, right? Okay. And for him, he needs to make, a good 5+ digits a day, right? Like that's what he needs to make. Yeah. I trade between 6:30 and 7 a.m. Right.
Nice.
It doesn't matter what I make in there. I have rules, hard and fast rules. All right. And it's not every day. Sometimes at 7 o'clock comes around and I stop, and I could have made $200, right? So, if I make 5,000 before 7 a.m., I stop. Right. Yep. If I lose 5,000 before 7 a.m., I stop. Okay. I've had both those happen. And so it just depends on the day. It's not every day that the crazy things happen, but he has to every day make at least 5 digits. And sometimes it's 10,000 flat, and sometimes it's an astronomical amount of money. But if he just makes, crazy thought, imagine if you made $5,000 a day. That is roughly, it's just south of $2 million a year. It's like 1.675 or something. It's in that area. It's around. That's a lot of money in a year, right? You don't need that money, promise you. That he would not be happy. That's not his success, right? And for anybody else to be like, okay, I'm gonna go be happy now. Not that guy. But so where was your misconception? Because I'm sure you had it when you're younger, like red Ferrari. That's what I needed. Where was that?
I don't know. I don't remember what my material is. Actually, no, I do now. A really nice brick Tudor house on the shore of Lake Michigan, because I never had visions of living out in California. It was Milwaukee or Chicago. So a nice big brick Tudor house. I'm not a car guy. I'm unusual there. So I never had a car ambition, but yeah, being kind of the big man on campus or in the neighborhood with that nice brick Tudor house and being a man of the city or whatever, that was kind of my vision. And fortunately for me, that vision kind of got wiped out early. You can see the end of that one in the late 90s, early 2000s. The world was just changing way too fast.
Right.
So I got rug pulled on that one early on. I was like, all right, we're going for something different here.
No, I mean, that's good though, right? And I guess I I tell people I consider myself lucky, right? I also know what I had to put into my success, right?
Yep.
Tons of scars there, paid a lot of prices, right? But I still say that there was an attribute of luck that played into my success. But, I think that's what people need to understand is vision of success is different every time. Your why is different every time, right? Yep. And I think that's a fear that I have for the current world is it seems like everything on social media being the current world perception is that it's all about money, right?
Yeah.
It's all about what car you drive. Like I drive a Toyota, right? And I love it, right?
Actually.
Right?
Yeah.
There we go. Like,
I wanted to admit that's what I did.
Hey, listen, I drive a Tacoma and my wife drives a Corolla. Best vehicle we've ever owned, right?
Nice.
I would buy those cars 10 times over. But man, every time I turn it on, it turns, it works.
Yep.
Right? All I gotta do is change the oil. I
Yep.
love it. Right.
Yeah.
But the world tells us that that's not success. Right. The world tells us it's not. And so that's concerning about today's culture.
Yeah. And that was definitely an issue that I had when I was younger, where the trappings of success were more important than the reality of creating success. And I think once I had that rug pull and I understood that, it took a lot to change my mindset. But over 20 years and what have you, I've slowly started to figure it out. And one of the things that I came across, Bill Walsh, the legendary coach of the 49ers, he had a quote that the score takes care of itself. And so what's not said there, and you need to read the book, what have you, is what you do every day will end up creating the outcome. And if you do it right and you do it consistently with a good attitude and your best effort, you're going to get a result that you're ultimately going to be happy about. And once I think you reach a point where A, I don't need the trappings or the illusion of trappings. And then B, it feels pretty good to do good things, execute on a project, whatever it might be, have a good year in the investment arena, whatever it is, help a client. It feels really good to do that. And then you can just trust that the results are going to take care of itself, assuming you've got the right processes and everything, and you're taking care of business behind the scenes. That's a liberating feeling. It really is.
No, it sounds like my volleyball coach. He says, you don't need to watch where your ball went. If you did what you're supposed to leading up to the time you strike the ball, you should know it was an amazing slam. Go back to your position, return to base.
Yeah. Yeah. And then back on the Bill Walsh thing, they didn't win the Super Bowl every year. You won't have the best success every single year, but you will always be in a position where you can recover and rebound and try to win next year. And a lot of those people who go for the trappings and go big early, if it doesn't work, what's your next option? What's your next day like? How do you go back to your position on the court if you don't know where that is?
That's a great thing to Greg, and as transfer into the side of talking specifically about what your organization does. I say that to my trading partner every day. I have a hard stop on loss because my goal is to live to trade another day, right? Yeah. Because if you don't have a hard stop, right? If you don't have a limit, it could be absolutely detrimental to your portfolio, right? Yeah. And I'm okay taking losses. I can live with losses. I've learned to live with losses. Yep. However, you have to find your pain tolerance, right? And it doesn't matter how big it is to my portfolio. 5,000 is my daily limit. So it doesn't matter. Like that to me, I would sit around all day and I would calculate what could $5,000 buy me? And I'll sit there all day talking about what any more than that, I can live with it. But that's where I want to transition to what you're doing currently. So you got out of the rat race, right? And now you create your own rat race. Right?
Kind of, sort of. It's good though.
Talk to me about your feel good rat race.
Yeah. So again, my firm, it's Venato Investment Advisors, and we manage money for individuals, nonprofits, families, small businesses. And it's interesting because I have relatable businesses, but they're somewhat separate in that I've got an RIA side where it's financial planning, some wealth management, stocks, bonds, and cash. But then on the other side, I've got a traditional money management business where, in particular, at this point, I've got a proprietary U.S. small mid-cap equity strategy. And it's funny because a year ago, when I was telling people about this, a year and a half ago, and what have you, everyone was saying, no, you got to do one or the other. You got to focus. That's the key to success early on. You can't do too many things. I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're not wrong, but I'm going to tell you something. What's been really crazy is where I see the growth in the near future is coming from a location that I never had on my radar. I thought, more or less, given all the competition, I'm probably just going to be this local RIA guy. I'll slowly build my business. And what's happened is I've got a pretty good track record now. I've got a 5-year track record in my small mid-cap strategy. And suddenly I networked with some people, including this guy who's based in Dubai. And now I'm in an accelerator of his. And in a few weeks, I'm going to Dubai to present and talk to a bunch of heavyweights in Dubai, which was never on my radar. And so what I'm trying to do is blend you've got to focus, but also create optionality in the ways that I can create value for clients. And so that's where I am today. And I don't know where I'll be 3 to 5 years from now. I have some ideas, but I'm really laser focused on taking advantage of this phenomenal opportunity to bring in a ton of these clients and hopefully create some excellent value for them.
No, that's great. And where are we going to be 3 years from now? Who knows, right? I tell that to my trading partner all the time. He's like, I think we should take outside money. I said, I don't want to ever touch anyone else's money except my money. Home office is my way of life. But who is your client? Who's that client avatar for you?
Well, that's why people were telling me I shouldn't be doing both things, because there are a couple of different clients that fit into the mix. So my RIA type clients could be anybody with a small, 401k rollover IRA, somebody who recently inherited money or came into a small chunk of change. And I'll take small minimums because I like helping people. And so that's on the RIA side. The money management side with the small mid strategy, that's going to be a complement in their larger portfolio. So usually these will be certainly high net worth, maybe some nonprofits, family offices who they've got an equity allocation, but they want a small chunk in small mid or an allocation there. And I focus on high quality. That's where I make sure make sure I'm in business the next day. And so we look for great companies that have a chance to compound over a long time horizon. My dream is to buy $1 billion market cap company and hold it till it's a $30 billion company. Wonderful opportunity if you could do it. But that's what I try to do. And it's, as a portfolio, it's a little bit lower volatility. So it complements the riskier investments, the high growth of the distressed stuff in small cap. And it's either a complement or it's a core allocation in there. So that's where I fit in with my clients.
No, that's great. And, I think it's wonderful that you have a diverse approach to things. I operate numerous accounts myself, some, very short term, as in day trading, and some swings, some leaps, right? And I think that's what's, what you said there is get $1 billion company, right? And hold it to its 30 billion. Like, what an opportunity that would be for you and the clients. And so I think it's nice that you have a traditional approach to things with an eye open for innovation and direction. And I think that it's an interesting place to be with your particular field, as I see not only with people who we have on the podcast, but folks who are my clients that oftentimes are either really traditional or they're really innovative, right? And they're like, oh, I'm going to do everything completely different, like we've never done this before. Or, hey, listen, stocks, bonds, hang out, right? And so it's great that you're finding a way to shift between those two.
Well, my fundamental concept for a business strategy is to follow the Amazon model. And I've had this belief for a long, long time. If you look at the Amazon model, they started with just books, right? Compete with Barnes and Noble. They developed their resources, a website, clients, IT infrastructure, marketing. They're like, all right, well, now you can expand into consumer electronics. And then you've got the Kindle, and then you've got AWS and groceries. And so the idea is, and particularly as an entrepreneur for me, the concept was, what are my resources, which is largely my experience, my network, and how can I create value with that? And being open to trying some things and seeing where the client slash resource alignment comes together. You know, in every job actually I've ever had, that's what I've always done. And so you'd go to a job, say as an analyst, and there'd be 4 other analysts, and you're all trying to be the best analyst and pick the best stocks and get promoted to PM. Every step of the way, I looked at all these people and said, all right, how am I different and how can I leverage it? Every time I always went off in some different direction, because I don't necessarily want to compete head to head with all these people. I want to do something different, and I want to find that need to fill. But you don't always know what it is until you get out of the trenches and get in there, get into the mix and find out what people need. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And sometimes it'll be a little bit more traditional. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more offbeat, but it's all within the context of what are my resources, what are my limitations, and how can I use that to create value? That's the basics of it.
You know, that is an interesting take, because, you know, one thing that I've learned throughout time is generally the path you sought to start off on, that original plan, ends up not being the plan at all, right? You know, if telehelping was what telehelping was when we first had our first client, we would only be working with healthcare companies. Like we would be working with virtual staff and call centers and health companies. We only have one healthcare company client.
Okay.
Right now, right. And so it's, you know, I think that having that perspective, being able to keep an open, you know, take off the blinders, right, and not just sort of like, I am going to get to portfolio manager. There it is, right there. Right? And understanding that, wow, oh, hold it, there's paths out here. I don't have to follow the yellow brick road.
Yeah, and you know, the hard part is, for good reason, a lot of people say, oh, you've got to focus. What's, you know, your question, what's your ideal client? Good things you need to understand. But yeah, a lot of times it's going to manifest itself way different than where it does when it starts. And how can you be open and flexible enough to incorporate that? And that can be a game changer if you can figure that out.
No, well, I mean, to give you an idea, it's been years now, since a couple of years, where I wanted to solely focus telehelping on certified financial advisors, RIAs, you know, portfolio managers. And I was like, this is great, because we had a handful of them. Like, these are great clients, right? Like I valued their character, I valued their business. It's like, I'm like, okay, this is a single person shop. When he spends $1,500 to $2,000 a month on a virtual assistant, that means something to him. Right. And so he's careful about his time. He's mindful of what he's spending, because I didn't like being the tail of the dog anymore. Right. To being like, oh, yeah, we should pay those people. We're 30 days late. Okay. My bad. And so we changed our stroke there. But it wasn't going straight to CFAs and things that got us. We actually ended up making strategic partnerships with back offices. You know, the firms that were doing all the compliance and strategic pieces that make that person capable of operating that small business, because there's this huge firm behind them. And I realized that was our go to market, right? And you know, instead of approaching 1,000 to 2,000 CFAs or wealth managers, we approached one, right? And would have never thought, and I didn't even know it existed until I started having clients, and they're like, oh, my back office. And I was like, what do you mean back office? What are you, the government? and they have this huge firm over here that's doing so much for them so they can focus on the clients. I was like, what can we offer them? Like, what's our value to these guys? And it turns out compliance, trust, right? You know, a moral compass, an ethical partner, right? And what they're trying to make sure their CFA is. Right? So, you know, we became a tool to them, and, you know, it would have never thought, never even could have been on the plan. And I think that's the important thing. And I like to point out themes in my conversations is, you know, keep an open mind to the path that you're yet to define.
Yeah. I totally agree. And the great thing about it also is, I think you hit on something. One of the best things that I learned when I did my little foray into startup world is the best solutions are ones that solve problems. Everyone loves to talk vision, AI, or this or that. But if you can solve a problem, you have value on day one. And that's true whether you're a startup or an employee. solve problems. You found the problem to solve, and suddenly your business just took off on you. Probably a lot easier than calling 1,000 different wealth managers too.
It was, manage one relationship. And, the thing is, you also have to give a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I think that's marriage, kids, career, the idea that if we can walk through life and get everything we want all the time, is a crazy thought process. You have to go with the ebb and flows. That is the opportunity. Sometimes it means taking a couple steps back. Sometimes it means giving more than you feel comfortable with. And I think that, it'll lead you in the right direction if you don't fight the river.
Oh, completely agree with that. Completely agree. Just make sure you get on the other side, under the other shore, though. Don't fight the river, but get to the other side.
Yeah. You don't want to. Correct. You do not want to go over the waterfall.
No.
Right? If water's moving fast, it's for a reason. So,
grab that rock.
Well, Greg, I really appreciate your time today, and this has been a wonderful conversation. Again, I appreciate jumping on and giving us the opportunity to discover more about who you are and the way that you go through life as a man and an entrepreneur.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I've really enjoyed it, and I have to say, I love the pictures behind you. Those are beautiful. They're awesome.
I appreciate it. I have some new ones that I'm excited to post out there. We just took new maternity for the new guy coming in. This is for the guy who I don't know if the recording can hear, but I can hear him all the way across the house. So he must be giving her hell.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Oh, well, sir, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
This video was brought to you by our official sponsor, Telehelping. Need support for your business? Telehelping connects you with top-tier remote staff to help you streamline operations and fuel growth. Go to telehelping.com and get started today.